role at GoCompare. So yeah, really looking forward to this conversation.
Sorry, Lily, I'm just going to interrupt you because I think we had a little bit of an issue there. So we're just starting now. Sorry about that. So bear with me, guys. It's going to be really boring for them, but I'm just going to run through that preamble once more. So hello there. Sorry for a slight delay. Thanks for joining us for this Elsewhen webinar. You just heard Lily introducing herself. I'll give her a chance to do that once more in a second. My name is Matt Sachivko. I'm head of marketing here at Elsewhen, and I'll be the chair for today's webinar. So before we get started, I'm just going to have to give a little bit of background and do some housekeeping on the webinar. So today's webinar is being recorded on YouTube, so it'll be viewable back at this link. So feel free to share the link, and if anyone wants to watch it back, anyone you think might find it interesting. With that in mind, I have left chat open on YouTube. There will be a little bit of a delay, so bear with me if I don't get to your questions, but please don't hesitate. We were just discussing, there's no such thing as kind of a silly question. That's what we want. So please don't hesitate. So who are Elsewhen, other than being the hosts of this webinar? So we call ourselves a digital product consultancy. What that basically means is we empower leaders to harness a cutting-edge approach to design and technology to deliver a positive impact for their organizations. We're sector agnostic. We work quite a lot across financial services, larger fintech companies, insurance, insurtechs like Zego, more established names like Bupa, and we previously worked on a project with GoCompare. Lily joins us from GoCompare, not in any professional capacity, but before my time, we worked with GoCompare, and we work with large technology organizations, so people like Google and Spotify and so on. This is the second webinar we've hosted on YouTube Live, which is abundantly clear because I just made a little technical error, but we're up and running now. So any feedback, and bear with us, appreciate your patience with that. And to learn more about Elsewhen, visit the website or drop us an email, hello@elsewhen.com. Okay, that was the end of my plug. Which unfortunately the panelists had to listen to twice, but there you go. So today we're talking about adopting new technology for your organization. So before we discuss what we mean by that, let's kick off or go back to our intro. So really sorry, Lily, I think we got most of that, but do you want to just try that one more time?
Yeah, sure, I'll do it super fast. So my name's Lily Smith. I've been working in tech for about 15 years, mainly in product roles, mainly in SaaS and the mobile space and in startups, and currently head of innovation at GoCompare, which, if you don't know it, is the price comparison website for insurance.
Caroline?
Yeah, cool. So hi, everyone. So I'm Caroline Parnell. So my most recent role was the head of new product innovation at O2, where I managed a team that was responsible for finding new product opportunities outside of O2's core business. Before that, I've led multiple product teams, primarily in consumer software, both for O2. And then before that, I was also at Vodafone for about 10 years as well. Tend to always get involved in roles where it's about taking a very ambiguous challenge or problem on a post-it note and right through that process to eventual launch and scale. So yeah, really looking forward to the discussion as well.
And finally, Angelica.
Hi, so I'm Angelica Stevenson. If we haven't met yet, I'm a senior manager of strategy and innovation at Sky, based in the main office in Osterley. So my career has been in tech for all my life. I've been predominantly in television, and I've worked in technology innovation for the past 2.5 years. I began my innovation journey setting up innovation pipelines for Sky's content supply chain program, which was about innovating the way in which we ingest, process, and deliver our content to our customers. And my current post in innovation now is a much broader remit, where I look after innovation opportunities and managing the innovation process for Sky's group technology division. And yeah, that's me. Looking forward to a lovely chat with you guys. And don't worry, Matt.
Thank you. Yeah. Got to press go on various different places.
It happens. It's technology. It's all good.
That's my excuse. I'm sticking to
Everyone will be forgiving.
So you started to hint there, Angelica, about innovation is a broad church, and your remit within kind of innovation within Sky has shifted. Perhaps to kick off, because our question in terms of like adopting new technology, again, could be a broad question, right? Depending on where you're sat in the organization. Frequently in Elsewhen, we work on things like what's sometimes called change management or digital transformation, which can be, a complete end-to-end migration from one technology to the other. But then there can be adopting new technology from within an innovation department, and then on a even more micro scale, an innovation department that has a specific remit. So Angelica, you started to talk about it there. How do you kind of define innovation, and how does that work in your day-to-day work?
It's a very good question to start. Because one of the things that may have already come out in our introductions is that innovation can be in different areas of the business and have a different focus. So, I'm, one of the things that I'm not is I haven't worked technically in product management, but technology innovation is really focusing more about the upcoming technology trends such as AI and blockchain, 5G, thinking about all the technologies that could have an impact to both to individuals, maybe not both, individuals, businesses, society, and thinking about how those could impact the organizations, Sky. So that's in the context of technology innovation. And then you treat innovation in two angles. There's a part about understanding the technology and the potential opportunities it brings. But then there's the other end of it where you think about the problems or the opportunities that your colleagues, that your business unit, your clients are expressing, and trying to find that match between the two. But overall, if I think about innovation, I summarize it as value creation. So if we speak about innovation more generically, it doesn't necessarily have to be making something from scratch. It could be taking things that exist already and putting them in, getting them to work in a different way. That's considered innovation. Innovation could be small, innovation could be big, but at the end of the day, it's about value for someone or something. I think that's a good starting point for food for thought. I'd love to hear from the others and your take.
Yeah, so Caroline, if we take Angelica's phrase, I like that, value creation. So how would you kind of unpick the value creation of innovation in your experience, and how did that present itself?
Yeah, so definitely think exactly as Angelica said. I think I would tend to look at it more through the lens of sort of like product innovation, but absolutely product innovation that has clear technology sort of underpinning it, or product it solves a clear need or sort of customer problem. But absolutely, it does have to deliver some form of value to the business. And I tend to look at that can be value in its broadest sense. So, I mean, in my most recent role, we were concerned with profit and revenue. So for us, a big lens was, is this genuinely something that O2 can make long-term sustainable revenue from? But it doesn't always have to be the case. So when I've worked in other roles in mobile, because mobile is a subscription business, actually your commercial lens might be more about how do we acquire more customers? How do we stop customers from leaving? Or how do we get those existing customers to spend more? I mean, for other businesses, it can be more about preventing industry disruption or managing the costs within your business, or some higher sort of like business mission. So I think for me, I'd almost put that frame under, it's some form of business KPI that company cares about.
I think,
go on, sorry,
I was just going to say, I think one of the other things that I was considering when we talk about innovation is, what happens in the absence of innovation. If you don't consider innovation kind of critical to your business, basically what you're saying is you're just going to do everything in the same way, and you're going to have the same product, and you're just going to focus on that one thing, or you're going to stick to what and not explore anything new. And I think the absence of innovation, the result of that is your business becomes irrelevant, because everything will change. It might around you, it might change at a slow pace, and you might stay relevant for a long time, but eventually you'll become irrelevant if you don't innovate.
Yeah, I'm sure I've got a copy of The Innovator's Dilemma somewhere behind me. And there's that kind of that notion of innovation is something that you undertake or it happens to you eventually. I'm interested, part of the way I was sort of thinking about the companies that you, all three of you have worked at is, compared to a lot of sectors and a lot of industries, they could be broadly said to be saying that they're companies that have digital in their DNA a little bit more, and perhaps they interrogate new technology from within their sector and beyond with that lens. I'm wondering, Lily, I know you haven't been at GoCompare but for a huge amount of time, but with your product background, being brought into the innovation team at GoCompare, what's the kind of lens? How do you look at it with that in mind?
So I think where we kind of start with looking at new technology is really trying to build a place to sort of explore and a place to be curious about what's going on in the world and what's going on in technology sort of area itself. I think in order to you need to know what's going on in order to know where to start, if that makes sense. So really that kind of culture of curiosity, of kind of expanding, of doing that horizon scanning process and all of that kind of stuff. But even if you did horizon scanning but you weren't really naturally curious about what something was, then you probably wouldn't dive into it. So for me, it really starts with setting the culture right and setting the tone right for innovation. So the kind of the curiosity and the creativity, and as Caroline said earlier, really understanding the user needs and being able to kind of bring that into the thought process as well. But I guess to start that process of evaluating technology, first of all, you have to know what new technologies are out there. So that's the kind of the starting point.
So perhaps if we start to think about the broad criteria you mentioned there, user needs, so that would be a potential start point. And Caroline, you also mentioned there's a kind of a business imperative, right? Could perhaps what are the other sort of broad criteria? If we think of the first process, if we're doing what Lily's describing of like looking at the horizon scanning, emergent technology that's out there, what is the initial kind of broad criteria that you would approach evaluating that new technology? That was to Caroline, sorry.
All right. Okay. Great question. So at O2, we literally developed like a full sort of innovation pipeline, and we really encouraged ideas from across the business. So we were really open about our scoring criteria to say, right, every idea that comes in will be scored against, we had 4 lenses that we would look at. So absolutely, as you said, the customer angle. So to what extent does this idea, delight our customers better than what's already out there today? The second one, definitely the business lens. So if that is revenue, what's the revenue potential, even though it might be quite a high risk idea. So you have to sort of overlay that onto it as well. The third big area for us was sort of fit with our business strategy. So it's really important when you're looking at those ideas to say, well, how relevant is that for O2 and the journey that we're on? Doesn't mean you wouldn't do it, but it's going to be a lot harder. So for us, just a random example, but if it was a new connectivity product, yeah, highly relevant. We run a connectivity sort of network. If it was, to roll out a series of garden centres across the UK, absolutely no, we don't have any, relevance in that space, so we wouldn't do it. And then the fourth element for us was, and this was very high level at those early stages, but some idea of the complexity or difficulty to bring that idea to market. So again, if we were looking at rolling out a whole new network infrastructure that was going to cost, £50 million and take 3 years, that would be very different compared to a new application that you might want to do in sort of 3 months, or sort of 20 grand or whatever it was. So what we would do for all those new ideas was literally score them against those 4 criteria. And although it sounds quite basic, actually, it was very good at no idea ever scored 100% on all of them, but the best ideas would float to the top. And then it was quite clear what your priorities were going to be.
And I'm just kind of interested, sometimes we talk about organizations being customer centric, or using these or sort of customer delight at the top of that list potentially, or trying to. Is that, in your experience, how it would work out, or was it the business lever, or is it perhaps it's a kind of a board decision, right? We feel that we're moving in this direction, and therefore we need to just find the cases within that. What's the hierarchy within that criteria?
I think it sounds like a cop-out answer, but it isn't. But it really does depend on the context. So absolutely, the customer piece has to be throughout, constant customer testing, measuring your decisions with customers, seeing sort of what resonates. So absolutely, customer is important. But say, for example, a real challenge from the mobile networks recently has been, how do we monetize the billions of pounds we're all spending on 5G? And you can't not look at that and see that is it's big from a business point of view, from a business KPI. Yes, it is something the board cares about, but that automatically does become a very important challenge to look at. But similarly, if your industry is being disrupted by a major new player that's putting your whole revenue at risk, you can't ignore that either. So I just think it really does depend on the context of what that problem is. I think the interesting thing for me is I believe that a product idea, it can come from, here's a new technology, like Angelica was saying, what do we do with it? It can come from, here's a customer problem or a need that we're not solving, or it can come from the business KPI angle. But then as you work that idea through that process, it then needs to have all three. So it can come from either, but you then need to flesh it out so it has all three, or I don't think it's never going to be a feasible idea.
Angelica, do those criteria of sort of, the customer delight, the business lens, business strategy, and potentially the complexity of bringing something to market, I mean, to me, it sounds a bit like sort of, product methodology, which could be, we might apply some version of it at Elsewhen, desirability, feasibility, or viability for a new idea. Does that resonate with you, Angelica, as how you would approach,
I kid you not. I kid you not. When I was doing my preparation for those, were the same headlines I was putting down on my notes. So yeah, 100%. I want to also add to that, because when I tend to think, when I looked at the question about broad criteria, there were these three buckets that came to mind. And what Caroline had spoken about is one of those buckets. It's the second bucket, but I'll tell you the other buckets I had in mind to categorize all this. So when I do my evaluation, the first part for me is like evaluating, at least in my context, is evaluating the tech itself, right? So what does it do, right? What are people saying are its benefits? And will it have the potential to impact one of many industries? And I think about like the technology's maturity and its likelihood to mature. So for example, quantum computing, probably not going to be something that matures right now, but blockchain, much more likely to mature. And you're going to start to notice different investments coming through. And it's nice to get that gauge about, just say, how much investment is being taking place in a given technology or the supporting technology. So if you start to think about VR and trying to get it out to the world, well, you kind of need a supporting technology. You need something that delivers low latency, right? So 5G is quite ideal, but then you have to track both of those things, for example. And so that's the first bucket where you just kind of look at it as is, because once you understand what the technology is and what are people saying as benefits, then I think about the technology in the context of the organizational landscape, which is all the things that Caroline had alluded to, company strategy, fit to the fit with the brand, even, execution, impact. Then there's another thing that I wanted to add to this bucket, which, hear me out. Excitement factor. So excitement factor is an interesting one, because you say, okay, well, if you can put the logic in place to say that something is viable for lots of different things, if you're trying to sell that into a group of people and their eyes glaze over because it just doesn't sell with them, you have to really take that into consideration. Because even if you convince them that something is worthwhile going to POC or pilot, the fact it doesn't catch there, or give them the desire to keep coming back, what's about it, what's more, what's happening, where is it going, it's so much harder later down the track to bring it into a production context. The other thing, a third bucket that I wanted to put a focus on was about evaluating the tech against the area of potential need. And I kind of listed things here, does it make or save money, time and effort? Does it improve the customer and employee experience and the environment? And does the tech reduce risk, for example, for the company? So yeah, that's my 2 cents on where I kind of go things. Sometimes the order is out of whack, but those are the sorts of things that I tend to look into throughout the process.
Yeah, I'm into talking about the excitement factor. I mean, I think we'll get into the because there's some quite sophisticated kind of methodology and frameworks that you all employ, and I know the audience want to know how the companies who are really getting it right are approaching it. But there is something that always strikes me, which is that winning that internal buy-in, right? Which, if I understand you correctly, Angelica, that excitement factor. It's one thing if it's going to move the needle commercially, and of course that is a huge lever, but also it's going to get people excited to take part. I mean, I know that's perhaps not very scientific criteria, but how much of a big factor is that for people? Anyone jump in there?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it certainly helps a lot if you can get the organization excited by by the project that you're doing. And I think when you're working in an innovation team, you're constantly kind of fighting for resources against the business as usual. So in order to get the resources that you need to kind of push your projects forward, having that excitement factor really helps. But I think it doesn't always come from excitement about new technology. If you're talking to the financial department, they're going to get excited about the return that you might be able to get on that. So it's being able to find the factor within that project that's going to excite the different people that you're talking to. So, but yeah, excitement is your friend.
Yeah, what do you go on? Sorry.
I say, just to add to that, I think definitely that piece about really understanding what those different needs are from across the business, because as Lily says, how you speak to marketing is very different to how you speak to finance or IT. I think there's a very real problem sometimes with innovation as well, which is it depends where innovation starts and finishes within your team. So within my team, we would literally see the idea through to ultimate launch, but then we would be handing it over somewhere in the core business for it to be managed in life. And that is one of the big areas where innovation goes wrong, because you get to the point that you're ready to hand it over and there's no one there ready to catch it as you lob it over the fence. So one of the things we spent a lot of time looking at O2 is very, very early on, when you've got the sort of grain of an idea, who would be the most relevant ongoing commercial owner? And their involvement in that process at the start might literally be 5% of their time, because you've got no idea if the idea is going to be a success. But as it then goes through your innovation pipeline and it becomes more certain and it's likely it will be launched, they should be involved a lot more, so that it's not a lobbing over the fence, but more of a gradual handing over, and there's somebody ready there to take it. Otherwise, you've got nowhere to send the innovation to go, or it ends up being closed down 6 months later because actually that new owner was never bought into it in the first place. So you have to be very careful, especially in large organizations, as to how you manage that process.
Yeah, I'm wondering, I mean, maybe a controversial question, but I as a bit of an outsider, really large corporates frequently have innovation labs, so they have a standalone space where they're doing lots of interesting stuff. Perhaps they're even bringing in very early stage startups and and they're bringing in people with really strong backgrounds in sort of product methodology and people who are used to spinning out companies and building sophisticated business cases for exciting new ideas. But then when you have that, sometimes the thing that I wonder is if that innovation lab, it sits in a box and it doesn't necessarily, there aren't those there isn't like a pipeline for that to sort of bleed into the wider organization. I'm wondering, am I along the right track, or are innovation labs great, or is there a bit of a danger that innovation becomes you know, it's something that never actually, you know, there's a danger that these new concepts never sort of hit the market. You know, they haven't quite figured out that journey. Is that what you're getting at, Caroline?
Yeah, I think certainly, and I know that's a hotly debated topic about where should innovation sit within a business. Should you have it as part of the core business, or should you have it outside the core business so you protect it? I think from what I've seen, I think, again, it really does depend on your, you know, your horizon level for innovation. So to use O2 as an example, if you're innovating on mobile tariffs and price plans, you have to be in the core business, because that is, you know, where we make the majority of the money. That's where all the people would sit for that. In our world, we were innovating adjacent to the core business, but we still wanted to use the O2 brand, the marketing, the channels, the IT resource. So in that instance, you don't want to be in the core business where you might get deprioritized, but you want to be just adjacent to it, so you can still use those capabilities and those relationships. I think to what you're talking about, Matt, when you get really disruptive innovation, sort of game-changing, whole new business concepts, or sometimes some of the startup incubators, then I think it is good to separate it out. A really good example we used to use in O2 was, some of you might have heard of giffgaff, which is like more of a disruptive network play, sort of like it's a low value network, but they don't have any cost from call centers, because it's all sort of digital and all online. And that was a really interesting one, where as soon as that idea got approved, it was completely moved outside of the core business, different office, different brand, different management team, because the people there at the time knew the one thing that was probably going to kill that idea was the business itself, because you're separate, you know, you're setting up a competitor that's going to compete with your sort of core business. So I really do think it depends, how much do you need what your core business has to offer, or are you actually competing for resources as to where it sits in the business?
Yeah, there's also potentially that danger, you know, really great. You talked about, someone mentioned the thing of being disrupted. I think it was you, Lily. You talked about that danger of being disrupted from outside. And sometimes there can be that potential of, are there certain sort of sacred cows to the business? You know, are you in danger of cannibalising some of the ways that the company really makes money? You know, this may be where the industry is headed, but right now there's a kind of a commercial imperative to not, you know, explore that way, because it would be too damaging to the core business units. Maybe I'm wrong, but it strikes me that GoCompare is a company that, you know, it has a different kind of origin story. You know, it's because from its day one, it was a way of rethinking how insurance was kind of, you know, bought and sold. So Lily, I'm interested to know, like, how is that different in GoCompare? Is there anything that you kind of you wouldn't touch, or is it kind of it's all up for grabs, and the company kind of evolves with the times, and, you know, and keeps shifting?
Yeah, I mean, I think we have a very pragmatic view of, you know, of the business kind of currently and the future, and the fact that customer expectations are changing. You know, within the GoCo group, we have Look After My Bills, which is an auto switching service. So, you know, we're very sort of aware of behaviours and expectations changing, and us needing to kind of change with that. That being said, the work that I do, you know, there is often that conversation of, is this going to cannibalise our kind of current audience and revenue? And my answer is kind of usually, well, if it does, then we should make sure we own that cannibalisation than someone else coming along and doing it, and them having the revenue and the market share. So yeah, I think it's definitely a consideration, and it's a conversation that often happens. But for me, it's better to own all of that than to have it go somewhere else.
Yeah, it's kind of better to be in the race than not, than just kind
of
exactly. So one thing, so perhaps we should get back to you know, drilling down into these kind of the criteria, and because we sort of started at that first step of sort of scoring criteria of evaluating new technology, but then I feel like, you know, it gets a bit more sophisticated, a bit more detailed. Angelica, something like the business case, that's a broad notion. Different people in the audience have different concepts of that. What does that mean to you in the case of innovation?
So the business case, I'm going to treat the business case in this context as the final step, actually, to get this through into delivery. So depending on the technology or the problem and the use of the technology that you're you're evaluating, the business case, the definition of the business case might need to change. So say, for example, so I did a lot of work a couple of years ago on assessing computer vision and its ability to make certain processes efficient. Now, we on paper first decided, it was part of the innovation process, tried to work out if it was a viable opportunity. And then we started to do some maths on costings. Now, if that was to go into, if a business case to say it was going to make money was going to be the criteria for progressing it, it wouldn't have gone through. But we knew that we needed to take the time to go to POC anyway, even though the benefits at the time were marginal, to be able to learn more about how it was going to work in the context of our organization. And that doesn't necessarily mean trying to figure out, well, it is one part only about trying to work if the technology would be good enough and to figure out its efficiencies and its shortcomings. But then you had to think about the people that had to interact with it. And it was important for me to put the technology there early, even though it wasn't going to make money, I knew straight away, even if it was successful, because I needed to start to understand how they felt about something like a machine taking, potentially taking over a portion of their job, right? And trying to figure out the best way to find that great balance between making people feel empowered in their job, but also allowing them to be creative, but then also allowing the machine to do the things that perhaps they don't like. Right, so that was my example of saying, well, you might want to put something to POC. You might know it's going to take time to get it to business case, but if the business case per se, in other words, trying to do the maths and say, yep, it's going to make us money here, it's not going to be the case all the time. The other thing about the business case for me, though, if you do consider trying to get into delivery, this is actually very good, at least within Sky, it's a very good way of communicating with the delivery teams. So I'm going to latch into something Caroline said earlier about trying to get them bought into getting the innovation through into production. And so I'm going to tie a few things actually. So what I've done in the past is, well, if I get the business unit, the owner, the sponsor that is going to be in effect in charge of the delivery on board early, I work with them and say, look, I know this much of the cost, but there's a part of this in the business case where you guys will know the detail better than I. Let's work together to make that business case work, because you're going to have all the intricacies at your disposal to put into the business case, right? Because I can do so much of the math, but they will be there to help out, right? And then they can, because you've already worked to sell them the vision, to get them excited, the business case will have a better chance of going through because they're bought into it. Just trying to think if there's anything else. So yeah, it really depends on you have to think about the problem itself. If you're trying to get something that's a little bit more mature going into production, then yes, business case becomes important. But then when it's something much more emerging and a bit early and is something, there's a little bit of research to do, then I would recommend going back to those the criteria that we spoke about earlier, company, the potential for it to make money, the potential for it to save money, potential to, disrupt. And that's a good indicator to start off with. And then once it progresses, then you can start to refine on how specific you need to be to sell. Hope that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. I mean, I'm thinking also there may be, thinking about some of the projects that Elsewhen undertake, and I'm thinking, the output may not be business growth, right? Maybe it's, if it's something like improving internal tooling, or, like you're saying, it's very often it's improving efficiency. We work with organizations and they have sales teams, and there's, it's automating processes very often and things like that. So there's efficiency and there's productivity. So
yeah,
I'm wondering.
And there's learning as well, right? Like getting you a little step closer to what you want it to be, because you kind of, maybe you can't scope it out on paper. You need to just see it happen in front of you to go, okay, this is where we need to pivot the conversation, right? And similarly, broadening attitudes, so with AI and ML, as I've found, it's a time, you can have multitude of attitudes from, yes, I think it's from silver bullet to, oh my God, it's going to take my job and my livelihood away. And starting early to start to, show the benefits and the shortcomings in as honest a way as possible is something that, it can, that may not need a business case, but that is equally as valuable when you think about the long term.
Yeah,
I think what's interesting about this as well is kind of, you mentioned earlier, Angelica, about when you're evaluating technology, about the maturity of it as well and the support around it. And also when you're building that business case, understanding, depending on the sector that you're in, or the market that you're in, or the product that you have, like what's the opportunity cost as well, and the cost, or the cost of delay. If it's something that's very relevant to your sector or your product, like for instance, the kind of introduction of AI or machine learning, and that your competitors are going to be all over it, then you need to make sure that you evaluate that sort of sooner rather than later, because delaying that evaluation and that learning and everything could really, really cost you in terms of the development of your own product. And then on a kind of different sort of side, the opportunity cost of, if you want to explore quantum computing, but it's the trade-off is you're not doing a load of BAU stuff, which is really fundamental, then maybe you need to think about, well, actually, we need to do this BAU stuff because it's going to get us more right now, and quantum computing can wait. So yeah, I think there's those two things that really play into that business case as well.
Yeah, there's kind of, you can't be completely blue sky. I mean, Angelica, before you were talking about some of those things about, okay, very rarely do you have something that just exists in a vacuum. What supporting technology do we have that would we need to make this viable, and things like that. I'm interested in kind of it feels like the business case as a kind of an initial stage gate is taking a bit of a kicking. I'm wondering, Caroline.
I was going to say, can I give a different view?
yeah, exactly. I'm pulling you in here. How relaxed can we be? How relaxed should we be?
I think again, I suppose to define what we mean by business case, because again, often business case is the big fat formal document that you have to write to get sort of approval to launch. I think I would look at it slightly differently around, again, how do you give some indication as to what business value your idea could do? So to use an example, so say O2 we're looking at, do we go into the dog tracking market? At that very early stage, of course, you wouldn't write a business case. You've got no idea if anybody wants it, if it's going to be any good. But you can do really indicative sizing to say, well, what is the dog tracking market even worth in the UK? If it's tiny, you might decide then and there it's just not going to be worth bothering. So what we would tend to do is again, really high level, top down, is the market even worth it? And then a little bit of a bottom up, if they're selling for 10 quid, how many would you have to sell realistically to make it worth it? So really high level at that first stage of our sort of innovation pipeline. And then as you're going through those stages, you're just increasing your knowledge as to what that could be worth, so that when you're writing the business case, you're not starting from a blank sheet of paper. You've already looked at some of those different areas already.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I really want to talk about, get into talking about actually the detail, the methodology and the tooling, perhaps the frameworks that you're all using. But I mean, I am interested in, take my sort of background is in startups. I think for some of you it is as well. And you often don't start with something like monetization. It's maybe it's the thing that you're gathering, or your income stream is something like customer data, or perhaps it's like if you're an app and it's payments, and it's like credit card data and things like that. Is there, so I suppose, but it's easy if you're a startup because you don't have a bread and butter that, of what you do as an organization. I mean, this is kind of open to everyone, but is there always going to be, if you are working within innovation, within a large organization, is it always going to have to kind of reflect the existing commercial imperatives of what the organization does? And if it doesn't, do you have to do something like, you know, do you have to build a gift gaff or something? You know, how does that work? Do you have to kind of have a startup that lives separate? You know, I'm just wondering if perhaps you have an idea where you think, you know, perhaps there's a size of a market, but there isn't like a value on that market necessarily yet. I'm just sorry, that's a bit of a broad question, but I'm really interested in how little a really established organization might need in terms of a business case to start to explore in an area. Is it something like, Lily, you talked about, that, you know, the fear of being disrupted, an existential threat? Maybe you can talk about that. You know, would it be that, like, okay, we don't really know, you know, how this is going to affect the bottom line, but we're aware that these guys are kind of rethinking the supply chain, or they're rethinking this product offering that we deliver. So we need to look at that. You know, is that
I think so. I guess I approach it from a place of innovation and kind of insights or kind of creative breakthroughs, if you like, don't come from stressing about your business and where it sits in the kind of competitive landscape. They generally come from like the freedom to explore things and play with ideas and have a bit of space and have a bit of not be kind of tied down to a specific process. So what we've tried to do at GoCompare and our kind of innovation team, so I've only been at the company for 6 months, so it's fairly immature, but I've taken inspiration from like work that I've done at startups before. So we tend to kind of look at different technology areas. So chatbots, as an example, you know, rather than going, oh my God, we need to build a chatbot, or oh my God, we need to build an app, we'll kind of go, okay, cool. Like, what can you do with a chatbot? How does it work? Can we like just mess around with it a bit? And I guess hackathons are like really, really good ways of exploring some of this stuff as well, because it gives you like a nice out of your usual day-to-day. Everyone can get involved. You can play with ideas, but also you're time boxed as well. And it's a kind of, I think it's really important to have that ability to be out of your usual mindset and out of your usual kind of day-to-day work. Even if you're working in the innovation team, if I find that in order to actually tie in a new technology with a kind of business case or a value proposition, usually I don't come up with that insight or that breakthrough when I'm sat at my desk writing documents. I'll have to kind of do the exploring and the playing and the research and everything, and then I just go away and like whiteboard or do some doodling on my iPad or something, or just go for a walk. Or there's that classic thing of like, when you're in the shower, that's when all your best ideas come, and it's because you just have the freedom to think without constraint or without distraction. So I don't know if I've answered your question at all then, but I think that part of the innovation process is really important, of kind of having the research and having that, of gaining that knowledge and playing with stuff, and prototyping as well. You know, we've kind of talked about the different stages of business case that you might go through before you finally decide we're going to take this into production and that's what it's going to be. But there's that early business case of, we're even going to look at this and explore this, because you know, just the exploration can take a bit of time. So yeah, I think that part of the innovation process of playing and exploring and having the freedom and the space to do things outside of your normal day-to-day is really crucial, because you can look at a new technology, but unless you have the kind of the space to to think about it in the context of the rest of the business, you might not see the value that it could provide. And we've certainly had that with a couple of our innovation projects where it's like, oh, we could do something like this, or we could do something like this. And at the beginning, there's been no business value and there's been a vague sort of user value. But as we've played with it and learned more, it's developed into a much stronger proposition.
Yeah, and it's worth pointing out, I think, and I'll perhaps I'll prep you now. I'll ask you at the end for, you know, what sort of frameworks and sort of, you know, tools and things are you using, you know, because, you know, when you, for some in the audience, Lily, when you talk about sort of playing and experimenting, you know, there are things like workshops, and they have a very clear kind of, you know, there's different processes, and there are people have thought about this in terms of how you come out with valuable outcomes from that process. You know, it's not totally free form, but it's a useful part of it. Just like jumping along a little bit, because I'm conscious of time. If we start to, so if we take that first stage that perhaps Lily is talking about there, Caroline, it's clear that bad ideas need to be eliminated early, though, right? You know, that you have to have kind of stage gates so that you can kind of go, okay, we don't think that this is you know, viable or feasible or desirable, you know, by one or more criteria. This isn't really kind of cutting the mustard. What would be the next steps if something is more promising? You know, how is that? I'm really interested to get into how that's something that's fleshed out into something that the organization could adopt. You know, so O2 Vodafone, maybe that's how it's communicated more widely, or, you know, maybe it's getting a bit more detailed with your business case. What does that look like, that next stage?
So I think certainly as we played around with this quite a lot at O2, I think sometimes people cringe, but I do believe that with innovation, you do need some form of structure or process around it. Because when I picked up innovation at O2, I'm not joking, my first task was to work out how many innovation projects there were going on across O2. I found about 57. And these were all just completely random projects that people were working on sort of in their own time. And some of them were great ideas, but they'd probably been working on them for years and they hadn't really gone anywhere. And some of them, to be honest, weren't great ideas. And then you are probably then burning resource on something that's not going to go anywhere. So I think my first task for that was to say, you know, it's not efficient for anybody. It's not efficient for the business, but it's also not efficient for the individual, because they're not getting the resources or the support to progress those ideas. So, but then also completely agree with what Lily was saying around, you have to get the right sort of framework, because you don't want to squash innovation from being able to, you know, to breathe and explore and come up with new ideas. So what we would do is we would bring all those projects together, do that ranking that I talked about, say like what are the things, the territories that are really exciting, that we really care about. And then we had a formulaic process, you know, a five stage gate process. Very much that first stage was around exploring the art of the possible, design sprints, design thinking, workshops, you know, so many amazing techniques that you can just learn that really help with those sorts of things. And then, as you said, Matt, then at the end of each of those stages, it was a fairly informal, it wasn't onerous, checkpoint review that just said, right, how are you now feeling about this idea? Do you want to stop it? Because actually we've given it a good go. It doesn't look like there's anything there. So let's stop wasting time and resources on it. Do you want to park it? Which was actually quite a popular one, which was, do you know what? The technology is just not developed enough, or it's just too early. But let's make sure we do a good job of archiving it should we want to come to it in the future. And then, of course, the third one around progress. And then if it is progress, you know, how excited are we about that idea? And someone said earlier, how worried are we that our competitors might beat us to it? And at that point, when it's something the business is really excited about, you then make sure you've got the people there that can allocate budget to it, people to it, give it the right level of priority. And we were very lucky because we had a board director that was involved in that process. So then suddenly you've got, you know, the weight of someone quite senior in the organization that can help, you know, break through barriers or get you the resources that you need in order to do it. So how do you progress those good ideas? It really is making sure people have got the right resources, the right budget, and the right escalation if needed, just because you are working in a large company. So sometimes it can be hard to get people bought into it. And then you just work out like what's the right check-in framework that you want to use for that idea, to make sure that that person's got what they need to be able to keep progressing it.
Nice. That's quite
interesting. I'd just say is we were quite big fans of using, and I was obsessed with them, like one-page templates where you could just try and get rid of, onerous PowerPoint decks. So it really is a simple, these are the things you just need to fill in about your idea. And then it's a really useful framework. Then everybody can see, what you're talking about and have a good conversation about it.
That's interesting. Yeah, so it would be good to, I mean, it's kind of hard in this format to elaborate on those, but maybe I'll ask you if there's places people can read on those frameworks. I'm thinking about people who might be slightly new to this process, and where they would begin. But I'm wondering, you mentioned there, Caroline, that was quite interesting about how you kind of had a champion at board level. You had someone who had that kind of might that they could just sort of forcibly pull in other people, other business units and people from the organization. Angelica, what are the other, how do you feel? Obviously, if you've got that kind of representative at board level, that's super useful. Yep. But
super useful.
Yeah, is that been your experience, or what are the ways that the innovation team should best interface with a wider organization to kind of make the case for things? Do you have a very rigid process where you sort of, or not rigid, a structured process where you present new ideas? Does that work? What's the best way to kind of get that wider buy-in, and show what you work?
Yeah, I do. I agree with Caroline. I'm a bit of a sucker for structure as well, as I found with innovation, both in the way that we prioritize our ideas, in the way that we present said ideas to our throughout my career, like different clients that I've had. They like that pulse of what's going on, and it actually helps with building that excitement, as I spoke about before. I've had more success when I've had a business sponsor early. Oftentimes, well, in my earliest stages, we used to just accept all ideas, and we found the ideas that didn't have a home did not progress as far as ones that did have a home. And at least at the beginning, like earlier on with innovation, my innovation career, like there was this thing about, innovation's a home for the homeless. And that's not my quote, it's a Tendai Vicky quote. But I loved that idea of the people thinking, it's a place for the homeless ideas. But what I found actually, to progress them much further down, you do need to find that home earlier, because you find they're the ones that want to be involved. If they're bought in, they're the resources you call upon to develop the POC. They're the ones that want to be there for the pilot. They're the ones that are standing by the side of the business sponsor, because sometimes the business sponsor has only so much power, but they hear from the other levels of the organization that we have to make this happen. Given they're the ones that have to make it happen anyway, sometimes that the decisions are like, okay, if you guys make the time, do it. Yes, win. So super, so that just draws down on, I guess, the importance on the business sponsor. There's a theme there about getting the wider organization as early as possible, not too early, but just as early once you think, there's really something in there, we want to start to being a bit more hands-on. I think there's another framework I want to present that I've had quite a bit of success with, and I guess it answers your question about wider org, and it answers the question about frameworks as well. And there's this concept of the innovation ambition matrix that I've been trying to get my head around and introduce more so in my thinking. So if we think about innovations, there's a whole bunch of ideas, one to many ideas, and you categorize the ideas in the way that they disrupt. Yeah. So on one end of the continuum, you're going to have what's like the transformational style ideas, so new business models, new ways of working, new, and potentially the more, I guess, known way of innovating. Then you've got on the other end, you've got what's called core innovations, where they're the innovations that maybe make an existing process a little faster, a little cheaper. And then you have in the middle where you're potentially using existing processes, technologies, and to build those new ways of working. So it's that thing in the middle. And one of the things I've been trying to do as a framework with the ideas that have come in, or the ideas we've discovered, is, well, can we categorize what those ideas are and where do they sit on that continuum? And then with the clients I'm working with, we say, okay, what's your strategy for X period in terms of the way you innovate? do you want to be more transformational? Do you want to be, maybe because you know that there might be budget issues coming, you want to be a little bit more on the core side? Or do you want to take a more balanced approach in the way you innovate? And it just adds a bit more structure, a bit more intent in the way that we go about innovating, and puts a little bit more of a focus in the way of doing things, as opposed to everyone just going, oh, I'll do this one because it's shiny. You want to, have that ability to look across what actually they do want to innovate in. So having that framework in place just gives them that bit of attention to answer that question more thoroughly.
Nice one. So I'm going to have to, unfortunately, I feel like we've just scratched the surface and have to wrapping up now. I could tell you're full flow there, getting into the details. So perhaps I'll do I'll kind of wrap up, and I'll give you each of you a chance. If you could think of one insight, I know this is tricky, but one insight, perhaps to someone who's approaching this process from outside. So perhaps they're thinking about evaluating new technology from outside. If you give them one place to kind of go check out, go read, or one thing they could prioritize, just, one insight as kind of a start point from someone who is, as we've discussed, this is a really, big problem, and there's a lot of detail there. So I'll give you a chance to think about that just for a second. So, but to everybody who's watching, thanks a lot. As I mentioned, this is being recorded, so as soon as we wrap up, you'll be able to watch and share this webinar from this link. In a little while, I'll update the summary, so we've got some time codes, so you can, if you want to skip back to certain parts of the conversation we had, I'll update it there. If you want to know more about Elsewhen, we're a digital product consultancy, visit our website. Drop us an email, hello@elsewhen.com. We love talking about innovation and product methodology. I know everybody on the panel has a hell of a lot more to say on this subject. I would encourage you all to follow them. I'll put their social handles in the description. All three of them are podcasting, talking, broadcasting, writing on this subject and many others, and getting into a level of detail that perhaps we weren't able to today. So Lily, have you got one kind of neat insight you would give someone approaching this process?
Can I cheat and give like one resource and one tip? So my first resource is check out the Making Progress book by Ryan Jacoby, which is not specifically about evaluating new technology, but it's just about running an innovation department generally and innovation leadership, and it's amazing. So definitely read that. And my second is more specifically around evaluating new technology. Engineers are your friends in this area, because you may have an engineering background, but even if you do, just like circulating ideas and finding out what other people are excited about, you just need to keep talking to your engineers and finding out about what they think about things. So that's my tip.
Nice. Caroline?
Cool. If it's okay, I'm going to steal Lily's format because I liked it. So my one tip would be, if you're going into this completely afresh, know your purpose for why you're doing the innovation in the first place. I think that's where the biggest failure comes, is when people are doing innovation theatre for the sake of it, and that gives innovation a very bad rap, and it's quite hard to recover from. So just be really clear about why you're doing it, and then share that reason with the rest of the business. But my resource is going to be slightly different. So I suppose the biggest, most helpful resource that I found when I was looking at this early on was the Design Sprint book from Google Ventures. Not necessarily for having to do the 5-day full end-to-end process for design sprints, but for me, it just completely changed the way I thought about brainstorms and the whole process of coming up with ideas. So there's so many different techniques in that book that I've reused since. I think that's an amazing book if people haven't read it.
I definitely co-sign that, yeah. And Angelica, sorry, a format has emerged. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
A resource and a tip, yeah.
Resources. There are two people. I couldn't split who was going to be the winner. Two authors I definitely think you should look into. The first one is Amy Webb all of her work on tech trend discovery and how to systematically go through the major areas of disruption and setting up processes for scanning proactively. Fabulous. The second person whom I mentioned before is Tandaya Vicky. He has been very inspirational for me on how to be an entrepreneur, which is essentially what I am, a corporate entrepreneur. And then the tip that I would give to people today, prioritize how to be resilient. So everything in innovation, as there's always going to be a degree of excitement, but there's also periods where the excitement will fade away, and you might be the only person who is excited about the thing and can see why it needs to deliver. Taking those moments of how to stay with it when you're noticing things are failing, people may potentially have, they're no longer bought into the process, how to bring it back or how to find those opportunities to keep marching forward. Let's be honest, innovations fail more than they succeed for multitudes of reasons. But nonetheless, it is necessary to keep our companies relevant. And so I encourage you guys to keep thinking about the mindset, how do you keep pushing on?
Perfect. Okay, so we're a minute or two over time, but I thought that was really valuable to get those final thoughts from you all. Thanks a lot to everyone who tuned in. Feel free to share. Check us out, elsewhen.com. As I mentioned, I'm going to update the description of this video. I'll try my best to include those resources that just got mentioned at the end. But otherwise, thanks a lot. And thank you to our panelists.
Thank you, Matt. Thanks for having us.
Bye-bye.
Bye.